stranger at dawn, the morning air felt crisp as Daniel. Winters adjusted his worn baseball cap and checked his reflection in the car window. Gone was the tailored suit he typically wore to board meetings. Instead, faded jeans and a simple gray hoodie made him look like any other customer seeking their morning coffee. At 35, Daniel had built an empire of restaurants and cafes across America. But he had learned long ago that the truth of any business lived in its smallest moments, not its spreadsheets. Bluebell Bistro sat on a quiet corner in downtown Portland. Its vintage blue awning and brick facade, promising comfort and quality. Daniel had purchased it 3 weeks ago through his lawyers, attracted by its prime location and loyal customer base. The numbers showed potential, but something in the employee turnover rates had caught his attention. 12 staff members in 8 months. That was not normal. First impressions, the bell above the door chimed softly as Daniel stepped inside at 6:30 in the morning. The smell of fresh coffee and baking pastries filled the air, and warm lighting gave the space a welcoming glow. Small tables with mismatched chairs created an intimate atmosphere, and local artwork decorated the exposed brick walls. Everything looked perfect from a customer's perspective. But Daniel had trained himself to see beyond the surface. A young woman emerged from behind the counter, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She wore the cafe's uniform of black pants and a blue apron, but there was something in her eyes that made Daniel pause. Exhaustion, certainly, but also a guarded wariness that spoke of someone who had learned to expect disappointment. "Good morning. Welcome to Bluebell Bistro," she said with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Her name tag read, Rachel Monroe. "Morning," Daniel replied, keeping his voice casual. "Just a black coffee, please. And whatever pastry you recommend." Rachel's practiced smile faltered slightly, as if the question had surprised her. "The almond croissants are fresh from the oven. I made the filling myself this morning." "You made it?" Daniel asked, genuinely interested. A brief flash of pride crossed her face before the professional mask returned. "The kitchen lets me experiment sometimes before my shift starts. The croissants will be perfect." As she turned to prepare his order, Daniel noticed a man in his late 40s watching from the kitchen doorway. Heavy-set with thinning hair, he wore a manager's badge and an expression of permanent irritation. Greg Patterson, according to the staff files Daniel had reviewed. The man's eyes followed Rachel's movements with an intensity that made Daniel uncomfortable. The weight of words Rachel returned with a steaming cup of coffee and a croissant that looked like it belonged in a high-end bakery. The pastry was golden and perfectly laminated, with a light dusting of powdered sugar. "This looks incredible," Daniel said honestly. "Thank you," Rachel murmured, setting down the plate with careful precision. As she turned to leave, Daniel heard her whisper something under her breath. 3 words, barely audible, but they hit him like a punch to the gut. "Another day surviving." Daniel looked up sharply. "Excuse me?" Rachel froze, her eyes widening as she realized he had heard. "Nothing, sir. I apologize." "Enjoy your breakfast." "Wait," Daniel said gently. "Are you okay?" For a moment, genuine emotion flickered across her face. Fear, frustration, and something that looked like desperate hope. Then the walls came back up. "I'm fine, thank you. Is there anything else I can get you?" Before Daniel could respond, Greg's voice cut through the quiet morning air. "Rachel, table 4 needs clearing. Now." The change in Rachel was instant. Her shoulders tensed, and she moved quickly toward the mentioned table without another word. Daniel watched as she worked, noticing how she seemed to shrink whenever Greg was nearby, how her movements became rushed and uncertain under his watchful gaze. Observing the cracks over the next hour, Daniel sat nursing his coffee and observed. The cafe filled with the morning rush of professionals grabbing drinks on their way to work. Rachel moved efficiently between tables, her service impeccable despite the obvious stress. But it was the small moments that told the real story, when a customer's latte was not quite right. Greg berated Rachel loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, blaming her for the barista's mistake. When she paused to help an elderly customer with their order, Greg tapped his watch aggressively, making her rush the interaction. When she suggested they were running low on napkins, he dismissed her with a wave, calling her paranoid and overcautious. Daniel noted everything. The way other staff members kept their heads down when Greg was around. The forced smiles that never reached anyone's eyes. The tension that permeated the air like an invisible fog. Contradicting the cozy atmosphere the cafe's design tried to create, the croissant was extraordinary. Buttery layers melted on his tongue, and the almond filling had just the right balance of sweetness and nuttiness. This was not the work of someone going through the motions. This was craft, passion, skill, and it was being wasted. A decision forms as the morning rush slowed. Rachel returned to refill his coffee. Daniel noticed the small scar above her right eyebrow and the calluses on her hands that spoke of years in kitchens. "That croissant was the best I have had in months," he said quietly. "Where did you train?" Surprise flickered across her face again. "Portland Culinary Institute. Graduated 3 years ago? And you were working as a waitress?" A bitter smile crossed her lips. "The restaurant I worked at closed suddenly. The market here is competitive and I needed to pay rent. Bluebell hired me when nobody else would." "Rachel," Greg barked from across the room, "stop chatting and bust those tables." She flinched, the light in her eyes dimming. "Excuse me, sir?" As Daniel watched her hurry away, he made a decision. This was not just about fixing numbers on a balance sheet. Something was fundamentally broken here, and it started with the people who were supposed to lead. Those 3 words Rachel had whispered kept echoing in his mind. Another day surviving. Nobody should have to just survive in their workplace. They should be able to thrive, create, and grow. And if Daniel had anything to say about it, that was about to change. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to Jennifer Hayes, his corporate assistant. "Need complete background on all Bluebell Bistro staff by tomorrow. Priority on Rachel Monroe and Greg Patterson. Also, I will be spending more time here this week." "Keep it quiet," the response came quickly. "Understood. Should I prepare anything specific?" Daniel looked around the cafe one more time, his gaze settling on Rachel as she cleaned tables with quiet efficiency despite the hostile environment. "Prepare termination paperwork and start drafting a contract for a culinary director position. I will send details soon." He finished his coffee, left a generous tip, and walked out into the Portland morning. But his mind was already 3 steps ahead, planning not just a business transformation, but a complete overhaul of everything Bluebell Bistro represented, because sometimes the best business decisions were not about profit margins. They were about people, and Rachel Monroe deserves so much better than merely surviving. The pattern emerges. Daniel returned to Bluebell Bistro the next morning, this time even earlier. 5:45, before the official opening. Through the front window he could see lights on in the kitchen and a familiar figure moving inside. Rachel was already there, working on something at the prep counter. He waited across the street, sipping coffee from a competitor's shop and watching. At 6:15, Greg arrived, barging through the back entrance with the energy of someone who owned the place. Through the window, Daniel saw the interaction. Greg grabbed something Rachel had been working on, examined it with exaggerated disdain, and appeared to be lecturing her. Rachel's shoulders slumped, but she nodded and began cleaning up whatever she had created. Daniel's jaw tightened. Jennifer's research had arrived late last night, and it painted an even darker picture than he had imagined. Greg Patterson had been with Bluebell for 5 years, promoted to manager by the previous owner, despite 3 formal complaints about his treatment of staff. All 3 complaints had been quietly settled with small payouts and non-disclosure agreements. Rachel's file told a different story. Top of her class at culinary school, 2 years at the Harvest Moon, one of Portland's most respected farm-to-table restaurants, where she had worked her way up to sous chef. When the restaurant closed due to the owner's retirement, Rachel had applied to over 40 establishments. 0 callbacks. She had been at Bluebell for 7 months. Overqualified and underpaid. The second visit at 7 o'clock, Daniel entered the cafe. Rachel was behind the counter this time, and recognition flashed in her eyes when she saw him. "Good morning," she said, that practiced smile appearing again. "Back for another croissant?" "Actually, I was hoping to try whatever you were working on this morning," Daniel said casually. "I got here early and saw you in the kitchen." A blush crept up her neck. "Oh, that was nothing. Just experimenting with a new scone recipe. Lavender and honey." "That was perfect." I will take 2 and a black coffee. I am sorry, but those are not on the menu, Rachel said quickly, glancing toward the kitchen where Greg was visible. I was just practicing. Then I would like to try your practice batch, Daniel insisted gently. I promise I will give you honest feedback. Rachel hesitated, then made a decision. Wait here. She disappeared into the kitchen, and Daniel heard raised voices. A moment later, she emerged with a small plate containing 2 golden scones, their tops sprinkled with coarse sugar and tiny lavender buds. If Greg asks, You requested these specially, she whispered. Daniel bit into the scone and closed his eyes. The texture was perfect, crumbly yet moist, with the lavender providing a subtle floral note that complemented the honey's sweetness without overwhelming it. This was restaurant-quality work, the kind of baking that could define a cafe's reputation. Rachel, this is exceptional, truly. For the first time, he saw her smile genuinely. Really? You are not just being nice? I have eaten at some of the best bakeries in the world, Daniel said truthfully. This belongs among them. An unexpected conversation over the next hour. During brief moments when Rachel could pause at his table, they talked. Daniel learned that she had grown up in a small town outside Eugene, where her grandmother had taught her to bake. That culinary school had been paid for with scholarships and 3 part-time jobs. That her dream was to open her own place someday, somewhere that celebrated local ingredients and seasonal menus. Why stay here? Daniel asked during one of these moments. With your talent, surely other opportunities exist. You would think so. But Portland's food scene is all about who you know. The Harvest Moon closing meant I lost my connections. And when you are unemployed for 3 months, eventually you take what you can get. Even if it means working for someone like Greg. She glanced around nervously. He is not that bad. I mean, he has his moments. Rachel, I have been watching. He treats you terribly. Her defenses went up immediately. You have been here twice. You do not know anything about my situation? You are right, Daniel admitted. But I recognize talent being wasted when I see it. And I recognize people who have given up on better things because they have been beaten down too many times. Rachel stared at him, something fierce and hurt blazing in her eyes. Why do you care? You are just a customer. It was a fair question, and Daniel found himself treading carefully. He was not ready to reveal his identity yet, not until he understood the full scope of what was happening here. Let's just say I understand what it is like to work in toxic environments, he said. And I believe in people getting the chances they deserve. The evening revelation that afternoon, Daniel had Jennifer compile additional information. Staff schedules showing consistent overtime without proper compensation. Inventory records suggesting Greg was skimming supplies for personal use. Customer complaints about service that had tripled since Greg's promotion to manager. But it was the exit interviews from former employees that truly enraged him. Story after story of humiliation, unreasonable demands, and a workplace culture built on fear rather than respect. One former barista had written, Greg told me daily that I was replaceable. After 6 months, I started to believe him. Daniel made his 3rd visit that evening, arriving just before closing at 8. The cafe was empty except for staff cleaning up. Through the window, he watched Greg berating a young barista for some minor infraction. His face red with anger while the teenager looked close to tears. Rachel intervened, placing herself between Greg and the barista, saying something that made Greg redirect his anger toward her instead. She took it without flinching, her face blank. Until Greg finally stormed into his office, Daniel waited outside until Rachel emerged at 8:30. Her bag slung over her shoulder and exhaustion written across her features. He had been leaning against the brick wall, and she startled when she saw him. Are you following me? She asked, alarm creeping into her voice. Well, yes, but not like that, Daniel said quickly. I wanted to talk to you. Away from the cafe? I do not know you, Rachel said, taking a step back. This is weird. You're absolutely right. I am sorry. Daniel held up his hands. My name is Daniel Winters. I am a restaurant consultant, and I have been hired to evaluate Bluebell Bistro. I wanted to talk to you about your ideas for improving the place. It was not entirely a lie. He did consult on his own properties. Rachel's suspicion remained, but curiosity flickered across her face. Someone hired you to evaluate us? The new owner wants to make changes. I have been observing for a few days, and honestly, your talent stands out. I would like to hear your thoughts, maybe over coffee somewhere neutral. She studied him for a long moment. There is a diner 2 blocks from here. Public, well lit. We can talk there for 30 minutes. That is all. The vision shared the diner was a classic Portland establishment, all chrome and vinyl booths. They slid into a corner booth and Daniel ordered coffee while Rachel requested tea. So what do you want to know? Rachel asked, her guard still up. If you could change anything about Bluebell, what would it be? The question opened a floodgate. Rachel talked for 20 minutes straight, her passion evident in every word. She described a cafe that honored its neighborhood roots while embracing innovation. Seasonal menus featuring Oregon producers. A bakery case showcasing actual craftsmanship instead of mass-produced items. A coffee program that educated customers about origins and processing methods. And the staff, she said, her voice growing quieter. They should be treated like professionals, not servants. Fair wages, consistent schedules, opportunities for growth. Most of the people working there are incredibly talented, but they are so beaten down that they have stopped trying.
What about Greg?
Daniel asked. Rachel's expression hardened. Greg should not be managing people. He is a bully who mistakes fear for respect. The previous owner kept him around because he kept costs low, but you cannot build something great by making people miserable. If you had the authority, would you fire him? In a heartbeat, Rachel said without hesitation. Then she seemed to catch herself. But that is not my decision to make. I am just a waitress who shows up and survives each shift. There were those words again. Another day surviving. What if it could be your decision? Daniel asked carefully. What if the new owner was looking for someone to lead a complete transformation? Rachel laughed bitterly. People like me do not get those opportunities. We get promises and maybes, and eventually nothing changes. Not always, Daniel said. Something in his tone made her look up. Really look at him for the first time. Who are you really, Daniel Winters? Someone who believes talent should not be wasted, he replied. And someone who thinks Bluebell Bistro could be something special with the right person leading its transformation? And you think that person is me? Rachel shook her head. You have known me for 3 days. Sometimes 3 days is enough to recognize potential that others have overlooked. Rachel's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and sighed. I have to go. My roommate is wondering where I am. As she stood to leave, Daniel made a decision. Rachel, the new owner, is implementing changes starting Monday. Major changes. I think you should come in prepared to have a very different kind of day.
What does that mean? It means things are about to get better, Daniel said. Trust me. Rachel studied him with those guarded eyes, then nodded slowly. I have heard that before. But I will show up. I always do. She left the diner, and Daniel sat alone with his coffee, pulling out his phone. He sent a message to Jennifer, schedule emergency staff meeting for Monday, 8 a.m. All employees required. Have termination packages ready for Greg Patterson and complete contract for Rachel Monroe as Director of Culinary Innovation. Starting salary $90,000, with performance bonuses. Make it official. The reply came quickly. Confirmed. Are you sure about this timeline? Daniel thought about Rachel's croissants, her scones, her vision for what Bluebell could become. He thought about her whispered words and the resignation in her eyes when she talked about surviving. Completely sure, he typed back. Some things cannot wait. The morning of truth. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and light rain, typical for Portland in October. Daniel arrived at Bluebell Bistro at 7:30, dressed in a charcoal suit that left no doubt about his authority. Jennifer was already there, along with 2 members of his legal team and a human resources specialist. The staff had been told to arrive by 7:45 for a mandatory meeting before opening. As they trickled in, Daniel watched from the office window. Rachel arrived at 7:35, her hair damp from the rain, confusion evident on her face when she saw the closed sign and lights on in the meeting area. Greg showed up at 7:50, clearly irritated by the disruption to his routine. He immediately began questioning staff about what was happening, his voice carrying through the space with its usual aggressive edge. At 8 o'clock sharp, Daniel walked into the main dining area where all 15 employees had gathered. The confusion on their faces was universal, but Rachel's expression was different. Recognition dawned as she saw him in his suit, his entire demeanor transformed from the casual customer she had known. "Good morning, everyone," Daniel began, his voice calm but commanding. "My name is Daniel Winters, and I am the new owner of Bluebell Bistro." The shock rippled through the room. Rachel's face went pale, her eyes wide with what looked like betrayal. "I purchased this cafe 3 weeks ago," Daniel continued. "Before making any changes, I wanted to understand what was really happening here. So I came in as a customer. I observed. I listened. And what I found was unacceptable." Greg stepped forward, his face reddening. "Now wait just a minute. I have been running this place successfully for 5 years. You have been running it into the ground," Daniel said flatly. "Employee turnover is 3 times the industry average. Customer complaints have tripled. Revenue is down 28%. And most importantly, you have created a workplace environment built on intimidation and disrespect." "That is ridiculous," Greg sputtered. "These people need structure and discipline. What they need is leadership, not tyranny." Daniel nodded to Jennifer, who stepped forward with a folder. "Greg Patterson, your employment is terminated effective immediately. You will receive 2 weeks severance as required by your contract, but you need to collect your personal belongings and leave the premises within the hour." The silence in the room was absolute. Greg's face went from red to purple. "You cannot do this. I will sue for wrongful termination." "You are welcome to try," Daniel said calmly. "But I would advise you to review the documentation my team has compiled regarding stolen inventory, falsified time cards, and multiple violations of labor laws. Leave quietly, or we can discuss these matters with the authorities." Greg looked around the room as if seeking support, but found only shocked faces and, on some, barely concealed relief. He grabbed the folder from Jennifer, muttered something under his breath, and stalked toward the office. Daniel turned back to the remaining staff. "I know this is shocking. Change always is. But I want to be clear about my intentions. Bluebell Bistro is going to transform, starting today. Fair wages, consistent schedules, professional development opportunities, and a workplace where every person is treated with respect." He paused, letting that sink in. "Over the next week, each of you will meet individually with our HR specialist to discuss your roles, your ideas, and your concerns. Your input matters. But first, I need to address something specific." Daniel's eyes found Rachel, who stood at the back of the group, her arms crossed protectively across her chest. "Rachel Monroe, could you step forward, please?" Every head turned toward her. Rachel did not move, her expression a mixture of emotions Daniel could not quite read. "Please," he said more gently. Slowly, Rachel walked through the parted crowd until she stood a few feet from Daniel. Her chin was raised, but he could see the hurt in her eyes. "You lied to me," she said quietly, her voice shaking. "You made me think you were just a customer who cared. You made me trust you." "I never lied about caring," Daniel replied, aware that everyone was watching. "And everything I said about your talent was absolutely true. You deceived me. You let me share my dreams and frustrations, and all along you were the boss, evaluating me like some kind of test subject." The accusation stung because it held truth. "You are right. I should have been honest about who I was. But if I had walked in here as the owner, would you have told me the truth about what was happening? Would any of you?" He looked around the room at faces that clearly understood his point. I needed to see the real Bluebell, Daniel continued. Not the version people show the boss. And what I saw was talented, dedicated people being crushed by terrible management. Especially you, Rachel. So what now? Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You fire Greg and give us a pep talk and everything is supposed to be fine? No, Daniel said. Now I offer you a position as Director of Culinary Innovation for Bluebell Bistro. The room erupted in whispers. Rachel's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Jennifer stepped forward with another folder. The contract includes a starting salary of $90,000 annually, benefits, and a performance bonus structure tied to Café revenue growth. Your role would be to oversee a complete menu redesign, develop our baking program, and work with our new general manager to create the kind of establishment you described to Daniel last week. Rachel took the folder with trembling hands but did not open it. This is insane. You have known me for less than a week. I have tasted your croissants and scones, Daniel said. I have heard your vision for what this place could be. I have watched how you treat customers and coworkers with kindness even when you were being treated poorly. That tells me everything I need to know. But I have never managed a full culinary program, Rachel protested, even as hope flickered in her eyes. Then you will learn. I am bringing in a consultant from one of my other properties to help during the transition. But the vision needs to be yours. Rachel looked down at the folder, then back up at Daniel. Why? Why go through all this for someone you barely know? Daniel thought about how to answer that truthfully. Because 3 days ago, I heard you whisper 3 words that broke my heart. Another day surviving. Nobody should have to just survive at their job, Rachel. They should be able to thrive, create, and grow. And because I built my business on a simple principle, invest in people who have the talent and passion, and they will build something extraordinary. Tears welled in Rachel's eyes. Around them, other staff members were wiping their own eyes, the emotion in the room palpable. I need time to think, Rachel said finally. Of course. Take the day. Read the contract, ask questions. But Rachel? Daniel waited until she met his eyes. I am not asking you to trust me blindly. I am asking you to trust yourself. You know what Bluebell could be. I am just offering you the chance to make it happen. The decision. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Greg left with his belongings, escorted out by security that Jennifer had wisely arranged. The staff meeting continued with Daniel outlining immediate changes, wage increases, new scheduling software that would guarantee fair hours, and an open-door policy for concerns and ideas. Rachel disappeared into the break room with the contract. Through the window, Daniel could see her reading it carefully, making notes in the margins. His stomach churned with uncertainty. What if she said no? What if the deception had broken something that could not be repaired? At noon, Rachel emerged. She found Daniel in the office, reviewing financial reports. Can we talk? She asked from the doorway. Of course. Daniel gestured to a chair, but Rachel remained standing. I read the contract. I have questions. I expected you would. Why me specifically? You could hire someone with more experience, someone established. Daniel set down his pen. Honestly? Because when I watched you work, I saw someone who cared deeply about craft and quality, even when nobody was watching. Because your ideas for Bluebell were not about ego or trends, they were about creating something meaningful for the community. And because I believe the best leaders are people who remember what it is like to struggle. Rachel absorbed this, then asked, if I accept, do I report to you? You would work with our general manager on day-to-day operations, but yes, ultimately to me. Is that a problem? I do not know yet, Rachel said honestly. You hurt me, Daniel. Not in a dramatic way, but you made me feel like someone finally saw me, and then I found out it was all business. It was not all business, Daniel said quietly. The business part was evaluating the cafe. But getting to know you, hearing your dreams, that was personal. I genuinely enjoyed our conversations. How do I know that is true? I guess you will have to decide whether to trust me. Daniel stood, moving around the desk but keeping distance between them. I cannot undo the deception, Rachel. I can only promise that moving forward, I will be completely honest with you. And I can prove through actions that I meant what I said about investing in your potential. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the folder. Finally, she said, I want creative control over the menu. Complete control. Agreed, within reasonable budget parameters. I want to hire my own kitchen staff. People I trust. As long as they are qualified, absolutely. And I want it in writing that if this does not work out, you will provide references and help me find another position. Daniel smiled slightly. Jennifer can add that clause today. Anything else? Rachel took a deep breath. I want you to understand that I am terrified. This is more opportunity than I ever imagined, and I am scared I will fail. That makes you smart, Daniel said. People who are not scared usually are not pushing themselves hard enough. She laughed, a small, nervous sound. Okay. Then I accept. Director of Culinary Innovation for Bluebell Bistro. Daniel extended his hand. Rachel looked at it for a moment, then shook it firmly. Welcome to the team, Rachel. 6 weeks later. The transformation of Bluebell Bistro exceeded even Daniel's optimistic projections. Under Rachel's leadership, the menu had become a showcase of Pacific Northwest ingredients and creativity. Her lavender honey scones were now a signature item, with customers lining up before opening to ensure they got one. The new general manager, a veteran of the Portland food scene named Thomas Chen, worked seamlessly with Rachel to create an environment where staff actually wanted to come to work. Employee retention had stabilized, and customer reviews were glowing. But more than the business success, Daniel found himself drawn to the cafe for reasons that had little to do with profit margins. He came in most mornings, sometimes in a suit before heading to other properties, sometimes casually to simply enjoy coffee and watch Rachel in her element. Their relationship had evolved into something neither had quite defined. Professional respect certainly, but also genuine friendship built on their shared vision for what Bluebell could become. And underneath that, something neither was quite ready to acknowledge. On a Wednesday morning in late November, Daniel arrived to find Rachel experimenting with a new pastry, her face dusted with flour and concentration written across her features. What are you creating now? He asked, sliding onto a stool at the counter. Rachel looked up, her smile immediate and unguarded in a way it had not been those first weeks. Pear and cardamom morning buns. Want to be my taste tester? Always. She plated one of the buns, its spiral shape glazed and glistening, and pushed it across the counter. Daniel took a bite and closed his eyes in appreciation. Rachel, this is perfect. How do you keep doing this? She leaned against the counter, looking around the bustling cafe with pride. I have good motivation. And a boss who believed in me when I did not believe in myself. You did the work, Daniel said. I just opened a door. You did more than that. Rachel's expression grew serious. You saw something in me that I had forgotten was there. The passion, the possibility. I was so busy surviving that I had stopped dreaming. Another day surviving, Daniel quoted softly. Never again, Rachel promised. Now every day is about creating something better. They smiled at each other across the counter, and in that moment, Daniel realized that the best investment he had ever made was not the cafe itself. It was the decision to walk through its doors as a stranger, to listen without judgment, and to recognize that sometimes the most valuable thing in business is simply seeing people for who they truly are and who they could become. Outside, Portland rain fell gently on the blue awning, and inside Bluebell Bistro, something extraordinary continued to grow. Not just a successful business, but a community built on respect, creativity, and the simple truth that when you invest in people's potential, everyone thrives. Rachel returned to her kitchen, and Daniel sat with his coffee, content in the knowledge that 3 whispered words had changed everything. Because sometimes survival is not enough. Sometimes you need someone to show you that you deserve to flourish.